he was actually diagnosed on our youngest daughter's first birthday. I was still breastfeeding at the time, and I knew that I was going to be a single parent, and I also knew that I was going to have to deal with my own grief and the grief of my children. There were quite a few people who said to me, "Oh, well, you're not going to let the children go, are you?" And I was like, to their own dad's funeral? Are you serious? Of course they are going. And in fact, it is going to be based around them.
When you lost Greg, that time, how did you find that time from a communication point of view for your sort of friends around you and the people around you? How did you handle that time?
I think we knew that Greg was going to die.
Yeah.
Because he was diagnosed with terminal cancer at his diagnosis. So we kind of knew that straight away. But I think that there is a narrative that is around terminal cancer, which is probably to do with the fact that we find grief and dying so difficult to talk about, which is that kind of thing of like, well, you could beat it. You could beat this, you'll be okay. You'll be okay. And I found that personally exceptionally difficult. I think that there are other people who probably got great solace from that, and I can't take that away from them.
Yep.
People who kind of they need to feel like there could be a resolution or a miracle, that there's hope.
Yeah.
For me, and I think it possibly was to do with my position within the circumstance as being the parent that was going to be left, I realised quite quickly that I didn't have any luxury of believing that there was going to be a hope that Greg would live. It was very much, my hope was about how long can he live for, and hoping that he could have a good death.
Yeah. And that is so important, because when we live in denial, it is denial to an extent, when we just can't accept it. We can't prepare. On the podcast, we had a lady called Katie Costello, who you will love when you meet her. And she prepares people for that end-of-life space, so people aren't panicking. And actually, it's calm and peaceful. And it changes it changes the dynamics, and it changes the family moving forward with their grief. And that's the whole purpose of what we're trying to achieve here, is about how we go from grief to growth, really.
I could not agree with you more. And I think that I tried personally, in probably quite a secretive way, I would say, to try to prepare myself for what was going to happen. I knew I was going to be left alone with two small children. Yep. My daughters were 5 and 7 when Greg finally died, five years after his diagnosis. And I knew that I was going to be a single parent, and I also knew that I was going to have to deal with my own grief and the grief of my children.
Yeah.
And I felt the need to be prepared for that. And what was I walking into? What would end of life look like? How do people die of cancer? What are the kind of things that come up for people? And even though I did all this kind of very, private research in the background, I was still surprised, because I think because there isn't this open dialogue about what death looks like. I mean, the physicality of death, how the body changes, what are the physical time frame of what happens to a dying body. But it was also the grief of how grief looks really different, and it looks really different in different people who grieve the same person. And I think that is all to do with how we don't. It isn't an open discussion.
No.
And it's such a disservice to all of us.
Do you think as well that once we become more aware of death, and my goal would be is to educate people about death and dying prior to an event, being more aware of this stuff when things are okay. What's your thoughts on how that can change your world and life, having that awareness?
I think that what you're suggesting is a much better idea than what I did, which is having to try to quickly learn about it in what is already a traumatic situation.
Yeah.
It's also like thinking about children as well, of it's really hard to try to get them to understand the natural elements of death, and that grieving is a natural process and it's an emotion and it will come and go. It's really hard to describe that when they are in fight or flight.
Yeah.
When you are literally in the middle of the hurricane, it is such a better idea to familiarise yourself with those ideas when you're not currently in the middle of it. Because I think it just gives you that time and perspective to take it in and think about it as something that you will go through, and that you can support other people through as well. It's I think, goodness, I mean, Greg died when I was 41, and I had had other deaths happen to me in my life, but obviously the death of your spouse is a very, very significant death.
Yeah, it's your world, your foundations.
Yeah, and I felt like even though I had grieved before, I didn't understand this level of grieving and what it would look like. And I think that's also important, is to keep those conversations going, is to talk to children, to talk to young children about it, and to be able to keep talking about it, because people die at different ages. In my book, I write about a friend of mine who died of cancer when I was 9, and all of the children that were in the road, we all lived in the same road, there was lots and lots of children there, and she was my closest friend in that friend group, and she died. We were never told that she was going to die, and it was made, the decision was made with all the adults that the children wouldn't go to the funeral. And I can remember so vividly seeing my mum and dad leave the house and see all the other neighbours getting into their cars and the coffin driving down the road, and not understanding what was going on, because I was thinking, oh, well, she's just going to jump out. She's going to open the coffin and jump out, because this is ridiculous. How could she breathe in the coffin? Yeah. She's like, she doesn't want to be in there. And I didn't understand why it was me who knew what her favourite ice cream flavour was, and I was the one who played with her, but I was the one who couldn't go to her funeral.
It's crazy.
I remember at the very beginning there were quite a few people who said to me, because people love to be very vocal about funerals and children, said, oh, well, you're not going to let the children go, are you? And I was like, to their own dad's funeral? Are you serious? Of course they are going. And in fact, it is going to be based around them.
It's lovely to hear. Since I've done the petition, many people in their 70s, 80s got in touch with me to say, thank you, John, because I feel so bitter. I wasn't allowed to get to my dad's funeral when I was 10. You know, it's remarkable.
People don't get over it. People don't get over it.
They
I've
don't.
spoken to people in exactly the same situation. They talk about how they were told one day, oh, you know, your dad's dead. And then suddenly they're never spoken about again. The damage, the lifelong damage that does to people is unbelievable. And I think when I was organising Greg's funeral, we really wanted to include the girls in a very personal way. I realised that people wouldn't speak to them at the funeral. I really could understand that people wouldn't speak to them, and I thought that would be so scary for them. I knew that I would be someone a bit like, you know, like a wedding where everyone's going to want to talk to me. I kind of knew that. I knew that because Greg, we knew there was going to be a huge amount of people there, which there was. I knew I was going to be in demand, and so we were thinking of ways of how can the girls feel really involved. And what we did in the end was that my two daughters and their cousin, they spent a couple of days beforehand making hundreds and hundreds of cookies. And we then set up a stall. The place that we had the wake, we set up a stall that was called the Gilbert Girls Cookie Stall, and we built a sign, and we said that we announced actually at the funeral and on the order of service that the Gilbert Girls are going to be selling cookies for charity. That's going to be divided between Winston's Wish, which is all about supporting children in bereavement, and the hospice. Oh, and Bowel Cancer UK as well, 3 ways.
Okay.
And it was exactly what was needed, because people wanted to go and support that and help. And it meant that they talked to the girls.
Yeah.
And what was incredible about it is that the girls then had a job.
Yeah.
They had some responsibility at their dad or their uncle's funeral. They were important people there. They weren't like the kids off in the side that people were like, oh my God, don't talk to the kid whose dad's just died. What do you say to them? And suddenly we saw them, like all these people kind of giving them notes, and the girls are bartering with them. They're going, oh, you're giving us £10. I reckon you've got more than that in your wallet.
Yeah, amazing.
And there was that. And then so when they saw them later on, they would chat to them. That barrier had been broken.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
And then there was a stage on at the venue as well. And at the end, all of the kids that were at the funeral were all dancing, because we had music playing as well, and all the kids were dancing up at the stage.
Amazing.
And quite a few people did come up to me and say, I have never seen a funeral with children so involved.
Fantastic.
And I was so thrilled with that, because I even though when we were planning it, I think there were quite a few people who didn't think it was a good idea.
Isn't it a shame? Isn't it a shame that it becomes like a main focus, having that concern of having children there, and it's not an issue. It's not. The children are part of life, and I know you know this, but again, our relationship in the UK with death, it's just, I understand it. All children are different. We're all different. We're all individual. But the fact that overprotection causes more damage, it's just confusing. You also said about like the hurricane being in that moment, and I compare it really like bereavement education awareness to like a burning house, and actually having awareness, being proactive rather than reactive, is like putting the smoke alarms in place. You can't stop the sadness, it's still going to be awful, but you've got some awareness, you've got some protection, you got something in the house, and it's
that is a great analogy, John.
Yeah, so thank you.
Well done.
Cheers. So your book then is Now Is Not the Time for Flowers. So firstly, before we go into what you discuss in the book, how's it been for you writing this based on what you've been through the last 2-3 years?
I found it exceptionally cathartic.
Did you?
I think because as the role of the carer, like the other person, it's quite rightly, it's not your life. You're not the person who died. The focus is very much on the patient, the dying, the dead. But I think when you are the carer and you are the partner of that person, you share children, you share home, you share finances, you shared a future that you were looking to. Everything has also changed entirely, and I think that carers don't necessarily have the space to talk about how they feel and what comes up for them, because I think it's a very, very different situation than the people who have an illness or a diagnosis or after that person's died as well. I think it's a very different situation to everybody else. And so for me, it was really important to work through a lot of these feelings, and because there aren't these spaces for people who have been in my situation, I found that when I was looking for those kind of voices, those books or podcasts or just spaces where people were talking about that, I couldn't find anything. And that's ultimately why I wrote the book, is because I wanted to give voice to some of those internal feelings that aren't, it's not, my book is most certainly no kind of guidebook.
Yeah.
It's not written in a way which is very formal. It's incredibly personal about how I felt, how I thought, how I really messed up on a lot of occasions, and trying to dispel that myth of how relationships work in such, well, like you said, in a burning house.
Yeah.
People always think that of like, oh, you know, this huge diagnosis that's going to bring people together. And actually, if you think about it, if you're in a burning house with your family, you're probably screaming at each other.
Yeah.
Even if you're screaming, we need to get out, like grab this, grab that. You're probably screaming at each other because of the pressure, the utter, like, unfathomable pressure until you are in that situation. And it's really the same with a terminal diagnosis, because suddenly, you know, it's the match has been lit. Sorry to just totally jump on top of your analogy and take it on as my own, John.
No, you take it. You take it.
It's the beginning, because we didn't know how long Greg had, and in fact, he had years more than we thought he actually would. He had 5 years. But that initial diagnosis is when you light the match. Yeah. And also, I think, because you're dealing with the same situation, but from totally different sides of the coin.
Yeah.
I had no idea how Greg really felt about things, and he had no idea how I really felt about things. And I think, especially when you're you know, we had 2 really tiny children when he was diagnosed. He was actually diagnosed on our youngest daughter's first birthday.
Oh, dear me.
And we had our second daughter, who's older, who was 2, just about to turn 3. So we were kind of really in the thick of it in that young family babies situation. I was still breastfeeding at the time. I remember going to the chemotherapy workshop before you start chemotherapy, and I took my baby and I was breastfeeding in that session, and everybody around us was at least 70.
Yeah.
And everyone was talking about, I just want to stick around for a little bit longer so I can just see more of my grandchildren. And they were looking at us with pity. And it was such a wake-up call. And I mean, that's not, I mean, huge amounts of young people and children are diagnosed with cancer as well, obviously. But that wake-up call of like, we're in this time of life, but this total curveball has been thrown at us. And yeah, it most certainly wasn't always us kind of just being strong and stoic in the slightest.
But to young children as well, life's chaotic, just that. So obviously you're throwing this in the mix as well, and it's literally upside down then, and I'm sure it was a very difficult time. So my mum passed when I was 12, and from memories, like you say, it was just chaos. It was just, and she was trying to find alternative medicines to get better. Which actually she went away for 6 months to Poland to a retreat centre. So she was trying all sorts of things, bless her. But like you say, the control and calmness was pretty much gone from the house. With your children as well, how did they find those times? And we've spoken about bereavement awareness for children and the involvement of children. How did they deal with it? How did they speak about it and communicate with their mum?
I think they dealt with it very differently to each other. It was a really good example of how everyone deals with things totally differently. There is no one way to grieve, even if it is in the same household. People deal with things very differently. One of my children doesn't want to talk about it at all.
Yeah.
One of them wants to talk about it literally non-stop. And it was really interesting. Interesting is a strange word to use. It is interesting, but also quite traumatic to see how grief comes out in children. And we are so led to believe that grief is sadness.
Yeah.
And of course it is. It is one facet of what grief is. It's multiple things, and it's different for children as well. And I think sometimes because adults are not literate in grief, even if they are, they're trying to project how they feel onto their children, or interpret what's going on with them differently. So there's lots of ways that children that I've witnessed, they've dealt with grief totally differently, to do with regression in terms of age and abilities. The fear of being away from me was a huge one, which is totally understandable. It's your.
Makes complete sense.
I mean,
makes
of
sense.
course it does. I'm not going to let you out of my sight. I can't let you die. No, nobody said that. Nobody said those words to me, but that's ultimately what it boils down to: is I cannot let you out of my sight, because if you die, I die. It's kind of like that survival instinct, isn't it, in children? Anger, fury, tantrum, all sorts of stuff, like refusal to do things. It comes up, and I think because also children have so little agency in general. And they will pick these little things that they do have agency over, and it could be things like, I'm not going to get dressed today.
Yeah.
I'm going to refuse to wear my school uniform today. I'm not going to eat the food that you have made for dinner, because that's all they've got.
Yeah, is that them retaining control?
Yeah, of course it is.
That's control again.
Yeah, they don't have that agency, and because especially if people aren't engaging with them about how they feel, and sometimes they might not be able to talk about it. As in, they maybe, with my children as well, when Greg died, cognitively they didn't have the language or the
ability,
the ability, the awareness to be able to say, do you know what, I'm feeling really, really upset that all these other children in the playground have their dads here taking them to school and I don't. So instead it will come out in a totally different way, which will be something about socks, for example, of like absolutely refusing to wear socks. Because they don't know how to push back or to verbalise how they feel.
They're talking the language that they understand, basically.
Yeah. And it's a tough learning curve as the adult, trying to interpret these new languages that we're all trying to build between each other.
That's fascinating. I've witnessed when I gave a talk at the school for the where the teacher passed away, and after my session, I started the session by saying, I've got I'm here today to talk to you about what's going to happen, but also I'd like you to help me. I'd like to help me make a gift for your teacher, for her family tomorrow when we come back up here in the hearse. And then this is a surprise for the family. They're not sure. They don't know I'm doing this. And what we did, we had these small wooden hearts, and they all put their fingerprints on the hearts, put them in the jar, and then the following day we gave it to the family. So it was a lovely connection point, and they were involved then, and it was something from them to the family. But some of the questions I was asked after my talk and after doing the fingerprints, because they really relaxed then, and the questions that I was asked are, will their teacher be in the coffin? And will the coffin be open? Are her eyes open or closed? What does she look like now? How do you carry the coffin? How do you get the coffin onto the hearse? What's a crematorium for? So the questions I was asked, and especially like the physical questions about how she looks, I was thinking, like, these children are asking me questions which I think a lot of the teachers in here and a lot of adults are thinking. But as we grow up, we're sort of suppressed to think, don't ask these questions. And that's what creates this big divide in our country with death. This is why we're so sort of just, because we don't, it's the unknown. An unknown creates fear. So let's educate, and that'll remove the fear, remove the unknown, and actually we live better lives. It's my philosophy. So it was just fascinating. I just thought I'd share it with you, because what you've said there, it's everyone's unique as well, which is it gets complex, but because it's difficult, it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it.
Yeah, absolutely. What you just said really resonates with me. There's a moment in the book that I actually talk about my thoughts about when I see the hearse with Greg's coffin in coming up to the house.
Yeah.
And it's basically just like rolling dialogue of the conversation I'm kind of having with myself. And it sounds so much, even as the adult who organised the funeral, I'm still having those same weird thoughts that the kids are.
Yeah.
So, some of my thoughts as I was watching it happen, like it was really slowly driving towards me, I was thinking, is he going to be able to breathe? I wonder if they ever drill holes into coffins just in case they're not dead. Just in case there's a chance that they might wake up. I wonder if they ever do that. I was thinking about the clothes that I had given to the funeral directors for Greg, and I was then worried that they were too casual.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, everyone's dressed really smart, and I gave them really casual clothes, and I gave them trainers. Now he doesn't look smart like everyone else.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. And why does he need shoes? How have they who put shoes on him? Did they tie his laces?
Yeah.
What did they do? Did they clean his shoes beforehand? Then I started to think about, how would I feel about if I was in a coffin? Yeah. And it was literally just
Your
this
mind
kind of
runs away.
Weird rolling questions that you don't think about, that you don't know, that you that come up in the strangest ways.
And I think, again, back to the unknown, a lady I looked after with the funeral arrangements for her father, who was murdered in the town that I live, and she lives in Cornwall, lovely family, and it was so sad what happened. But a few months later she got in touch with me to say, I'm really struggling, John. When I'm next up, can I come and have a cup of tea with you? I said, of course you can. So just let me know in advance. So she came up, we had a cup of tea together, and just chatting about what happened at the funeral, just going over it all with her, because she was just in it's a complete surreal moment, as you're aware. And I said to her, would it help you to see the chapel of rest where your dad's coffin was? And she said, yeah, am I allowed to? I said, of course you are. So I took her in there. Obviously there's no one in there. It's okay, I remember this now, I remember this. And I said, would it help you to see the workshop where your dad's coffin was made? And she's like, wow. Yeah, I'd love to. Took her up there, and she said, oh wow. I said, again, I'm comfortable to show the mortuary space. You won't see anybody at all. You won't see any names on the boards. Would that help you at all? Yeah, it would, because I've got this picture in my mind that it's all like not very nice.
Yeah, like a horror film.
Yeah, horror film.
Yeah.
Showed her that. Wow, this is really nice. I said, I know. And it's, again, back to the unknown. It was taken away, and now it's really helped her. It's really helped her, because, and it's back to what you said as well, Stacey, about the shoes, and like, who put the shoes on? Were they gentle? And it's like all these questions. If we remove the unknown, I really believe it can help us in a tremendous way.
Yeah, I actually went to visit the hospice. Greg did go to a hospice in the end. That's not where he died, but I visited the local hospice by myself. I didn't tell anybody that I was doing it, and I didn't tell anybody afterwards, actually, because I wanted to burst the bubble.
Yeah.
So Greg was still kind of okay at that point, but I wanted to go, and I literally just turned up at reception and just said, I think I'm going to be here. Not me. I'm going to be here with my husband at some point. Yeah. Can you just show me round? And they were so lovely, because it just turned into this big thing in my head of you're walking almost into like the gates of hell. And it was it made me feel so much better.
Yeah.
Even things like I just knew where to park.
Yeah.
So it kind of took that little bit of pressure off. I knew where the entrance was. I knew where the toilets were. I kind of knew the atmosphere, and I think that can be really impactful, actually.
Yeah. You took charge of the situation, being proactive. So with the book then, what is the outcome you'd like to see? What do you want to achieve from the special work that you've done?
Well, two things really. One, I would really love people to not feel alone in the madness of their own heads, because I know it's not just me. I know it's not just me, and we all lose multiple people if we're lucky. You know, if we're lucky to live long enough lives and that we have close relationships, we are lucky if we lose multiple people that we love. Yeah. And I just want people to not just to put a voice to some of the weird and crazy things that go on in our heads or ways that we act in grief, so that people could read that and go, oh, wow, okay, I'm not mad. I'm not alone. And I think as well, I would like the book to start more conversations about these things earlier, about death, about what death looks like, about what grief looks like, about what grief in children looks like. And also, you mentioned a word earlier, growth, as well, about how there is, if you do this work, there is real potential for growth. And sometimes that can be a really uncomfortable feeling to link that with the death of a loved one. But it's true. It's really, really true. And it's something I found, and I think I wanted to talk about that as well, that there is potential to really expand yourself and your mind, and then to engage in your own life going forward in a much richer way.
With growth, I think why it scares people when grieving is because if I grow, does that mean I've forgotten about them? But actually, what you now know, and what I know, is that actually physically, love and emotion, it can't stop, it carries on. That once you know that's true, it's liberation. It's fantastic. It's amazing. It's incredible. And like you say, you live your life in a healthier, more aware way, in my view.
You know, I think about Greg, and he was a musician, he was an artist, he was a poet. That was kind of his entire life. That was his work that he did over his life. And I can't think of a better way to honour him, actually, than through creativity and to try to live a bigger life. If I think about, like, if I was to become a real shell of a person, you know, neither of us chose this. For us, for our children, it was just, you know, the luck of the draw. I feel that would be a massive disservice to him and to us, and to what happened.
That's incredible, Stacey. And my last sort of question for you on this, for someone who's going through what you've been through, what advice could you give to people that want to support that person but aren't sure what to do or say? What do you think?
Okay, I think in the first instance, the overall answer is to say something. I know that people are terrified of saying the wrong thing. I've absolutely been in that situation myself in my life, where you care, you feel for people in difficult situations. Could be people really close to you, and you don't know what to do. So you say nothing. And what I can say as being the person on the other side of that fence is that it was the people who said nothing whose voices were the loudest. If the people came to us and said, do you know what? I'm terrified of talking to you. I don't know what to say. I don't want to get it wrong. I don't want to upset you. That's fine. Yeah. That's fine, because you kind of go, do you know what? No, who does know what? I mean, there is nothing to say, is there? I mean,
you're trying.
Yeah. It's all just awful, but it's just being able to say, look, I think for me it was the most impactful thing that anybody ever said, I think, was I'm here to bear witness with you.
Yeah.
Because to be honest, you know, people say, let me know what I can do. Let me know what I can do. Your brain is absolutely all over the place. You can't think, and then you don't want to take on the job of like delegating to people jobs that you don't even know what they are. I think for me it was just, even if people said, do you know what, I'll just come and sit down next to you, we can just have a cup of tea. We could just watch something rubbish on TV.
Yeah.
Or we could talk about something, but I'll just be with you.
I'll show up, be present.
I'll show up, and to keep on showing up and not trying to fix anything. I don't need anyone to fix anything. I just need someone to be next to me. I think the thing that I remember the most is one of my friends, every time she checked in with me, say when Greg was ill as well, if there were scan results, if there were kind of new developments, she'd always say, when she called me, she would always say, right, where are we at? Okay, what do we do next?
Like it.
What do we think? And she always said the word we, and it immediately meant, okay, I'm part of a team.
Yeah.
This is a team effort here. I'm not of like, oh God, what are you going to do about this?
Yeah,
I feel so
cares.
I feel so bad for you. And it's very isolating. It's so othering because everyone else is kind of looking on with their kind of tilted heads and sadness but it's when people come where they're at as well, you know, with sadness, with their own feelings, because I think grief also brings up other people's grief as well, and that's fine, but to be like, I'm just here with you, I'm just sat in the rubble with you, and that's so often all we need.
I think it's simple stuff that we're saying and what you've just said, but it's our inability as a society to actually do it. So I hope your book can really help people, and thank you for being so honest. You know, you're pouring your emotion out for all to see, and I really believe it will help many people. I'm sure Greg would be immensely proud of everything you're doing. So thank you so much, Stacey.
Oh, a pleasure. Thank you so much, John.
A huge thank you for watching our podcast, Death, A Changing Industry. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel as we have some fascinating guests lined up. Thank you so much.